So 2009, the financial crisis unfolds, and I look up and say, I think I know partially why this happened. Because a lot of the smart people I went to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with went to Wall Street and helped devise the mortgage-backed securities and the exotic financial instruments that helped crash the economy. And so you think, okay, what a train wreck that is. Like, what's the purpose of trying to produce these talented people if they're going to do something that destructive? So I thought, well, what would you want people's energies to be devoted to if you could draw it up? And I thought I would love to see young people head to cities like Detroit or Cleveland or Baltimore or St. Louis or Birmingham or New Orleans and help grow businesses or even start businesses. So I quit my job, I donated some money to start a nonprofit, Venture for America, and I called rich friends with this question: do you love America? The smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to this question? And then I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. I was like, I thought you did. But I started Venture for America in part as a response to the forces that you all are experiencing here at the University of Chicago. When you showed up here day one, you had no idea what management consulting was. Now you can actually differentiate between firms. You're like, I'm more of a Bain person myself. You know, so how the heck did that happen? You know, like you didn't come here with these dreams, but these dreams are pushed upon you because the market now dominates our society to that extent. And to me, if the market dominated where our talent and energy was going, we were going to destroy ourselves. So I thought, well, let's try and find a more positive path for our young people who want to do something good. And I'm very proud of the work that Venture for America continues to do.
Well, talk a little bit about it. What has resulted from it?
We've helped create about 3,000 new jobs in 15 cities over the last 7 years. Our mutual friend Barack Obama honored me at the White House.
Yes, I remember.
A couple of times. So I got to bring my wife to meet the president. My in-laws were really excited about me for about a week. They saw the pictures. And I learned a lot during the 7 years of starting and running Venture for America. I saw this incredible idealism and energy and action as we helped create these several thousand jobs. But I also had this sinking feeling that our work was like pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom, because many of these communities were losing many more jobs than they were creating at a scale that was staggering to me, where if you fly between St. Louis and San Francisco or Michigan and Manhattan, you felt like you were traversing decades or dimensions or ways of life and not just a few time zones. And this is what gave me the perspective to run for president after Donald Trump won in 2016, because it was clear to me that the reason why he won was that we'd blasted away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, Wisconsin, the swing states he needed to win and did win. And what we did to those jobs, we're now doing to retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on through the economy. It's hard to be celebrated as Mr. Entrepreneur, Mr. Job Creation when you feel like the changes are destroying communities much, much faster than any of the positive work you're doing. It was a very hard lesson.
Before we leave Venture for America, Rico wrote a critical piece and said you had set this goal of 100,000 jobs by 2025, and you'd only created, I think they gave you credit for 4,000. So
look at that, I was conservative in my estimate.
Exactly, which an honest politician. And they said half the young people who had gone to serve had moved from the cities to which they were sent. How do you respond to the critique?
First, I'd say it's not 2025 yet. Second, I would say we should be incredibly proud of the 4,000 plus jobs and counting that we've helped create, and that half of the people that went to these cities did stay. But bigger picture, if we're going to make things work for communities around the country, we are going to have to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy in fundamentally different ways. And that's why I'm running for president.
By the way, if you have a birthday every month, it may be 2025.
Yeah, you're right.
By now. I want to talk to you about...
I could be as old as some of the other candidates.
By the way, now that you bring it up, should that be a concern? You do have, well, I mean, you know, come on, man, you walked right through the door.
What I would suggest is that we need to be laser focused on solving the real problems on the ground that got Donald Trump elected. And many of those problems stem from the fact that technology is fundamentally transforming our labor force and our way of life. Amazon alone, trillion-dollar tech companies absorbing $20 billion in business every single year, paying zero in taxes while doing it, and closing 30% of America's stores and malls. While being a retail clerk is the #1 job in the country still. The average retail clerk is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. These are the real changes that are devastating communities, and it's going to be difficult to solve these problems if you don't actually understand them.
Okay, so you wound around to answering my question. The question was, so is it your feeling that if you're nearing your 80th birthday that you might not have command of these forces?
I don't think you will have experienced them as directly, particularly if you've been in an environment, let's call it Washington, D.C., where...
Just to pick one at random.
Where your incentives in everyday lives are very, very different. And also, your town generally is 25 years behind the curve in technology because you got rid of the Office of Technology Assessment in 1995.
Let's talk about this issue of technology, because I've always, I've been a strong believer in this as being a real challenge, the march of technology, the mechanization of more and more jobs. It's something you've written a whole book on this, The War on Normal People. All right, let me just plug, done. Okay, let me check this off. And you raised this in the debate, because it really hasn't gotten a lot of attention. It struck me it didn't get a lot of attention in 2016. It didn't in 2020. A lot of the focus is on trade and the impact of trade. Virtually no discussion other than the discussion that you have propagated about automation. Why is that? Why has it not found its way into the national debate other than your intrusions?
My intrusions. You really know how to hurt a guy, David.
I mean that in a positive way.
I know. I mean, I want to commend...
Interventions. Let's call them interventions.
I want to commend David's colleagues at CNN, because I think they were responsible for helping push this conversation to the forefront. It's, again, a question of incentives. What are the incentives among politicians or media figures to talk about the fact that we are gutting the most common jobs in this economy? Unfortunately, they have negative incentives attached to this, and there's no accountability if they don't talk about it. I went to Washington, D.C., and I said, how are we going to help our people manage the fact that we're going through the greatest economic transformation in our history, the fourth industrial revolution? And the three things the folks in D.C. said to me were these. Number one, we cannot talk about this, Andrew. Number two, we should study that further. And number three, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And I said, that sounds responsible, but I looked at the studies. The success rates for government-funded retraining programs for the manufacturing workers in the Midwest who lost their jobs were approximately 0 to 15%. Half of those people left the workforce and never worked again. And of that group, half filed for disability. And we then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses to a point that America's life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years in a row. And their response to that was, I guess we'll get better at it. The fact is, nothing happens to the folks in D.C. if our communities fall apart. They don't lose their jobs. There's a reason why the D.C. metro area is the richest metro area in the country. They succeed whether or not we succeed or fail. On the issue of automation, after that debate, Paul Krugman wrote a column in the New York Times. I'm sure that you saw it. He said, after all, in the late 1940s, America had about 7 million farmers, 12 million production workers in manufacturing. Machinery could and did take over much of the work of those Americans were doing, and people at the time wondered where the new jobs would come from, yet the generation that followed was a golden age for American workers who saw dramatic increases in their income, with many entering a rapidly growing middle class, which makes you wonder what Andrew Yang is talking about.
Yang has based his whole campaign on the premise that automation is destroying jobs en masse and that the answer is to give everyone a stipend. We'll get to that in a second. One that would fall short of what decent jobs pay. As far as I can tell, he's offering an inadequate solution to an imaginary problem, which is in a way kind of impressive. So I don't actually know how that he really thought it was impressive or not, but he was clearly slamming your economic theory. Have you called him? Did you talk to him after that?
We've had informal exchanges, and I've actually asked him to just make a joint public appearance so we can go through the data together. He has yet to take me up on that. But a majority of economists who looked at it after that CNN debate said that I was right, that automation is responsible for the vast majority of the job loss in the manufacturing sector, that our labor force is not adjusting and adapting. Labor force participation has declined to 63%, a multi-decade low, which is not the sign of people adapting. Interstate migration rates have plummeted to a multi-decade low, also a terrible sign of people were adapting. So the numbers tell a very clear story, and one of the great frustrations I have is that otherwise intelligent people will actually refer to the first industrial revolution 100 years ago and say that this is a relevant fact pattern. The first industrial revolution included the origination of labor unions, the implementation of universal high school in 1911, and mass riots that killed dozens of Americans and caused billions of dollars worth of damage. McKinsey, MIT, the Obama White House all project that this industrial revolution will take place 2 to 3 times faster than that one and disrupt a larger number of jobs. So what I said to Krugman was, look, man, like you have your graphs, I have my graphs, but come with me to the manufacturing communities in the Midwest and tell them with a straight face that automation is not a problem.
As a matter of politics, though, it is easier to point fingers at China, at Mexico, than at robots and computers.
It is easier, but it's also incorrect. And when you go to the factories in Michigan or Ohio, you see wall-to-wall robots and machines. Same thing in every Amazon fulfillment center. At this point, you see them in just about every CVS or grocery store. All you have to do is go through the most common jobs in the US economy. Administrative and retail, including call centers, sales clerks, food service and food prep, truck driving and transportation, and manufacturing. Those are half of American jobs, and we know they're shrinking very, very quickly. Only 33% of Americans are college grads, 42% if you include 2-year degrees. We are a nation primarily of high school graduates, and the jobs that we fulfill day to day are the jobs that are most common and are disappearing before our eyes.
Yeah, well, that does speak to the need, though, to up the game in terms of education and training as well.
Well, I'm Asian, so I love education. Sorry, that was a little extra.
Says math on his collar there.
But that 33% of Americans who graduate from college, that's a relatively stable number. That number has not shot up in recent years. The 6-year completion rate at 4-year universities is only 59%. 41% of people who are starting school are not finishing within 6 years, and many of them are never going to finish. So if we insist that everyone's going to go to college, we're missing the point, because not everyone is going to go to college.
What about other kinds of training, though?
That is where the big opportunity lies, David. Only 6% of American high school students are in trade programs or apprenticeships or vocational tracks. In Germany, it's 59%. Think about that gulf, 6%, 59%. Meanwhile, there are millions of unfilled positions that would be lucrative, stable jobs for years and years to come. It is very hard to automate away the job of a plumber or an HVAC repair person. Can you imagine what a robot plumber would even look like? It's easier, actually, to automate away the job of an entry-level insurance agent or a job that's going to be occupied by a college graduate. That's one reason why the underemployment rate for recent college graduates right now is 40 to 44%, where almost half of college grads are doing a job that does not require a high school or does not require a college degree. So we are doing our
way to make the audience feel good.
It's all right. You all go to an excellent school. You'll be in the top 56%. So this is what we need to invest in to actually create stable livelihoods for more Americans.
You talk, obviously your signature proposal is universal basic income. Which has huge resonance in this room. Can you, but talk a little bit about that, how you came to it, how it would work.
It sounds like most of you know, universal basic income is a policy where every member of a society gets a certain amount of money to meet your basic needs. In my case, $1,000 a month. Now, this is not...
Every man, woman, and child, or?
It's everyone starting at age 18 until the day you expire. And this is not a new idea, it's not my idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, he called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King fought for it and championed it, called it the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. It is what he was fighting for when he was assassinated in 1968. I had the privilege of sitting down with Martin Luther King's son in Atlanta after the last debate, and he said that this was the vision that Dad was fighting for. Can you believe calling Martin Luther King Dad? But yeah, I was his dad, so... So this is not a new idea, it's a deeply American idea. And I became interested in it when I was reading books about the future of work while I was CEO of Venture for America. So I was Mr. Job Creation, helped create several thousand jobs. Read books about the future of work, and a lot of them are concerned about the impact of technology over time, and conclude that at some point you're going to need something like a universal basic income to help people have a path forward. Now, what really hit me, in addition to Donald Trump's victory, was a book by Andy Stern, who used to run the SEIU. You probably know Andy, right? Yeah. So he was the head of the biggest labor union in the country for a generation, and he said, labor is screwed, we need a universal basic income as quickly as possible, and he was proposing $1,000 a month for every American. And this, to me, was a shell shock because this was the first time it wasn't a technologist saying, hey, technology is going to eat all the jobs. It was the labor leader saying, hey, technology is going to eat all the jobs. His rooting interest would have been for the opposite. And this confirmed what I saw in the numbers. This confirmed what I saw over 7 years in the Midwest and the South. And so I said, we need universal basic income as quickly as possible. And that's when I decided to run for president.
So you say to help people with a path forward, but you know, the concern is that it essentially can seem as if you're saying, you're not going anywhere, your job is going away, so we're going to provide income for you. And income alone, as important as it is not sustaining. You know, purpose is sustaining, work is sustaining. So there are limits to this. I mean, we'll get into what it costs in a second. But
I couldn't agree more that the goal has to be to try and create fulfilling jobs and paths forward for people. But here's what most people miss. If you put $1,000 a month in the hands of everyone in a town in Missouri, let's say there are 10,000 adults, that's $10 million more in disposable income every single month. Where will the money go? It will go to car repairs and daycare expenses and Little League signups and local organizations. It will end up creating new jobs right there in the community that actually reflect the needs and the values of that community. And one of the examples I use is if there was someone in that town who thought about starting a bakery, maybe the bakery was a bad idea before the dividend, but then with another $10 million in buying power, they decide to open that bakery, they hire 2 people to work at it, and they know if the bakery fails, they don't die, they don't starve. So the big misconception is that putting money into people's hands is just about the money. It's actually about the economy that results from a trickle-up configuration.
And why do people in your zip code, or mine for that matter, need universal basic income? Why give millionaires and billionaires a stipend?
Well, the way I would fund this is through tax that falls most heavily on the people that win the most in our society. So if you're the Jeff Bezoses of the world, you're going to be paying millions of dollars into the system, and if I try and send you $1,000 a month to remind you you're an American, it's essentially immaterial. $1,000 a month is going to be much more meaningful to the 78% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, the 47% who can't afford an unexpected $500 bill.
Well, why not concentrate on them?
Well, part of it is that by making it universal, you destigmatize it, everyone gets it, it's not a rich to poor transfer, it's just seen as a universal right of citizenship. And it's modeled in part over the petroleum dividend that Alaska's had in place for almost 40 years,
right,
where it's also universally popular. Everyone gets it, from the richest Alaskan. I have no idea who that is. I should probably look it up. The richest Alaskan to the poorest.
And paid for by oil proceeds.
Yes, and what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, data, AI, self-driving cars and trucks. Who got their data check in the mail last month? Facebook, Amazon, Google. They got our data checks. What they're doing in Alaska with oil money, we can do for the entire country with technology money.
And how would it work? How would that work?
If we put a value-added tax in place that gives us our fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, eventually every robot truck mile, we generate hundreds of billions of dollars.
So a value-added tax on technology products and technology profits.
Well, you'd put the value-added tax across the economy, but then you'd ramp it up on things like AI and then exempt things like toilet paper, milk, diapers, and the like.
So it'd be less regressive.
Yes.
And what would the total cost of UBI be? That's been a big discussion.
Yeah, and I know a bunch of you are into the
expensive.
math. So here's the magic. All right, first, if you put in a mechanism where we actually share in the gains of the 21st century economy, generates 800 billion plus in value with a big up arrow attached to it. Because right now, if AI comes out and gets rid of some of the 2.5 million call center jobs in this country, how much value are we going to see? Zero. Because again, Amazon, the trillion-dollar tech company, paid zero in taxes. So they develop AI, they get rid of hundreds of thousands of jobs, we still see zero. So we have to change that. We get a slice of that. That number starts at 800 billion plus and just keeps on going up. That's step one. Step two, you put this money into our hands, it grows the economy, and all of the new economic activity, the multiplier effect, would generate hundreds of billions of dollars in new tax revenue because of all of the economic activity. Number three, a corrections officer in New Hampshire said this to me. He said, we should pay people to stay out of jail because it costs so much when they're in jail. This was a prison guard who said this. He knows what's happening when someone hits our institutions. We think we're somehow being smart by not investing in our people. We're paying in much more expensive and inhumane ways when they hit our institutions. We can save hundreds of billions of dollars on incarceration, homelessness services, emergency room health care, things that we're spending right now $1 trillion plus on. And then number four, this is the human element, this is the magic. Studies have shown that if you were to put this money into our hands, we would increase the size of our economy by 700 billion just because of better health outcomes and better education outcomes. This is before you factor in the fact that we'd be free to be more creative, take risks. It would actually reward the kind of work that my wife does at home with our two boys, one of whom is autistic. It starts recognizing the uncompensated and unrewarded work that happens every day in our families and communities.
Let me talk to you about that. You and I had a little bit of a chat before we came out here, in that we share an experience of a child with special needs, and partners, wives who have had focused all their energy and attention on caring for that child and the other kids because this is a family-wide burden. Tell me about Christopher, your son, who's 7 now, I guess.
Yeah.
And how your experience with his autism has impacted on you, on Evelyn, your wife, and your family.
First, David, I have to say, from our conversation, your wife sounds like a superhero.
She is. She is. I asked for no rebuttal time on that.
My wife's a superhero, too. And I remember when we found out Christopher is autistic, it was this huge relief because there had been so much stress and confusion and anxiety in our house leading up to that. And it was
Why was
Evelyn.
there? Because you knew something was wrong and you didn't know what it was?
Well, you're a first-time parent, so then when something's happening, you think, well, maybe this is normal. Maybe this is how 2-year-olds react. Maybe this is how 3-year-olds react. You're confused. You haven't been through it in a real way. And one of the reasons why I'm for free marriage counseling for any couple that wants it is that the divorce rate for parents with children who have special needs is 80%. And I saw the stress. I lived the stress. And it just makes me very, very grateful for Evelyn, but also really passionate about trying to strengthen what's going on with families around the country, because I talk to parents who have special needs children, and they are getting nowhere near the support that they deserve.
So one of the things that I learned, because my first child was the child who had these problems and challenges, well, there are a couple of things I learned that I want to ask you about. One was that, you know, your child is born and you have all these dreams and visions for what that child is going to do with his or her life. And then you discover they have these challenges, and you have to reorient your thinking. In my case, it was, will she ever be happy and healthy? Will
Yes.
she have a happy and healthy day? But, you know, again, you come from a family of high achievers. You probably had, you know, lofty visions. How do you make that adjustment?
I love this question so much, David, because this is really the underpinning of why I'm running for president. So if we let the market value us, what is the market going to value your daughter or my son at? We are in this position where we're actually arguing that we should turn coal miners into coders because we have confused economic value and human value. Where if the market says you have no economic value, then you are valueless, and then we have to try and find some other way to plug you into the machine for you to have any value. And if your town has no value or your occupation has no value, then that's on you, because we live in a quote-unquote meritocracy, and it's up to you and your hard work and your character. And when you have something in your family that lets you know how ridiculous all of that is, and how we need to evolve in the way we think about why we're human, what this country should be all about, what we should be measuring in terms of our economic progress. Should we be measuring GDP and corporate profits as our life expectancy is declining because suicides and drug overdoses and depression and anxiety are all at record highs? Or should we be measuring how our kids are doing, whether our environment is sustainable, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse? One of the things I said in my book, you all are here at the University of Chicago. You're at like the tippy top of the educational pyramid. To the extent that winners exist in our quote-unquote meritocracy, you are it. And I know that you do not walk around feeling like a winner like 100% of the time. That, you know, that you're anxious, you're stressed, you feel like you're in a race, you're not even sure what you're racing towards, but everyone seems to be running their asses off. And so if this is what it's like for the winners in this system, imagine the people who are kicked to the curb, looking up. This is why we need to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for human beings as quickly as possible.